Welcome to Higher Ground, a podcast that looks at the K12 leadership job market with a data-driven approach. Your co-hosts are Christina Greenberg, the CEO of Agility Search, who brings 2 decades of experience leading executive searches and meeting the talent needs of mission-driven organizations. And my name's Josh Czupryk. I founded Josh's K12 Jobs Blast and have been cataloging the K12 job market for the last 3 years. Now, stay tuned for today's pod. Hey, y'all. Welcome to episode 7 of Higher Ground. We're excited to have you to talk about community today. My name's Josh from Josh's K12 Jobs Blast.
Christina Greenberg from Agility Search. Josh, this is such an exciting topic because I know we're both parents and community members. I know I've been a board member, spent about a dozen years as a charter school board member, but also just people that care about what happens in our communities and with our schools. And I'm curious, you've had so much on the ground experience. What do you think really matters in terms of how leaders interface with community, and how do you do that in a respectful way that really engages parents authentically?
Yeah, I debated how I wanted to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it from the lens of being a Memphian living in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm going to say that because our county commission recently passed a new bill, and every single one of our school board members will be up for re-election in 2026. It was vetoed by our county mayor, and they overrode the veto. So every single one of our school board members, it stems back from this past January. They had a separation with our former superintendent in Memphis, but really seemed to go against public and family sentiment. Right. And so I'll leave it there. I'm not putting any of my opinions out there. But what I will put out there was, I think it was such an interesting case study. I'm like not listening to the community and making a decision absent family voice. And I've seen that, of course, at a single site charter. I've seen it at a charter network. I've seen it at a large urban school district. I've seen it at an SEA. And so I think it really does, so for me, stem from a lack of listening or curiosity. And I think families and parents can sniff out when a decision has been made before the stakeholder process begins. But I'm curious what you're seeing out in California and what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something near and dear to my heart. You know, I've lived in Oakland now for 20 years, and we've been involved. We have friends who've started organizations that, multiple organizations here around parent power and parent voice. Go Public Schools was focused on, our friend Jonathan Klein started it, focused on how are you rallying community support for school board members that will listen to parents and community. Our friend Lakeisha started Oakland Reach, which is now The Reach, and they work nationally, including with folks at Memphis Lift and others around the country around parent empowerment and how parents can be engaged directly in learning as tutors or as, community partners in schools, as well as politically and otherwise. And then my friend Kimi Keene, who actually will be featured later in this episode, started an organization here called FIA, Families in Action, focused also on parent engagement and authentically helping parents be involved in schools and having their voice heard and having their concerns met and listened to by the leadership. And so it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. I've always thought that, a lot of it is when you're talking with candidates or leaders, how they talk about community is really important. Do they see families and community as a necessary evil? Or do they see them as real partners, right? Do they care what families think or know about the school? Are they sharing data on a regular basis about what's happening? Are they communicating on a regular basis? Are they opening their doors to families to come in? And I think during the pandemic, it was a very interesting moment where we all saw our kids on Zoom at home, and it actually illuminated for a lot of parents what was or sometimes wasn't happening every day in their classrooms with the teachers, and made them think, wait a minute, what is really going on? And what is my kid really exposed to? So I think, and then obviously with learning loss and other things, it's been an issue. But I think that we can really, by asking people questions, by putting them in situations, I always believe at a finalist day, if it's a school network, you need to have people with real people, with, kids and families and community, and just see how they engage with them. And also by really looking at their background and understanding that relationship they've had previously with community, that you can really help both find people who have those values and then also elevate them to positions of further leadership.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that doesn't mean that every single leader has to come directly from the community. But I think that the leader has to know how to work with the community and not to a community. And I think, part of the stains of the early charter movement, and I've heard founders speak about this, is it felt paternalistic almost to come in and say, we know better about how to educate your children than you do. And these schools are, quote, failing. We are here to fix it. And I think that really discounts the lived experiences and the histories of community. And so for me, it's always exactly to your point, listening really carefully to how candidates talk about the community, but then to your point, also watching how they approach community and how they think about partnership with community. So if you don't see your community as an asset, I do question what your long-term viability as a leader is, and your ability to make lasting change.
And we also need to set up leaders for success, right? So I think as those, whether it's boards or, CEO, if it's school leaders or C-level people reporting to you, we also have a responsibility. And that's part of why I'm always an advocate for, even if someone has an internal candidate or potential people that they like for a C-level role or a really senior role, I'm always an advocate for doing a full search, not just because I'm a search professional and people pay me for it, but more importantly, because I actually think it gives you validity and credibility in the eyes of community, staff, leadership, authorizers, others, if there's a full search and people get a chance to really get to know you during that process. And then I think once someone's on board, as a board or as the person managing that, are we giving them opportunities to engage with different members of the community? Are we supporting them in that? Are we doing really good communication? I think there's a lot of responsibility that we bear. And then also responsibility in helping people learn how to directly work with community. I think, a teacher in a classroom, it looks really different how they engage with families than it does at senior levels of leadership. And so how are we ensuring that folks are ready and comfortable with that role?
Yeah, I will say, here's my tip to job seekers. And so I wasn't sure in my last job interview. It was at the University of Memphis. And I remember walking in, it was a committee of about 9 or 10 people. I can't even remember. And it was a 1 hour interview. And I just remember being like, if I'm supposed to get this job, I'm supposed to get it, but I'm just going to go in and be very honest. So I talked about look, here are the things that I bring. Here are the bad things I bring, right? Here's where I think I can do a lot of good. Here's where I may get on your nerves, right? And here's what I would do in the first 90 days. I remember when they called to offer, they were blown away by that level of candor, right? But I chose as a leader to be if I'm not the right person, let's find out before I take the job, then get in and realize it's not a match. So I tell job seekers all the time, it can be really sometimes we just need a job. And I totally understand that. But I think where people make a transformative impact in a job is when there is that right match between the candidate and the organization. And so I'm excited to hear both you talk about it here and to hear the second part of the interview, to hear about how we bring families and communities in to help inform that.
And I don't think it's enough to just say, oh, we did a town hall and people got to hear them. That's really helpful and important. Right. And we do those. We do, we often will do a Zoom town hall. It's not a two-way communication as much, right? But we sort of ask folks to submit in the chat questions. And then we have a moderator who asks those questions of the candidates so people can really hear their answers and get a feel for them. And then we, survey them to see what they thought. So I think there are ways of that. But it's also, again, I would be loath to hire someone for a role where they're supposed to be engaged with community all the time without having some part of their interview process, having them engage with community, right? That could be a focus group of families. That could be coming on site and just watching them interact with folks, kids, families, staff. There are a number of different ways you can have families on your panel, interviewing them and see how they treat the questions from those individuals. So there are a lot of ways, right, of engaging with community. But I think you want to make sure you have people that are comfortable with that. As parents, one of the hardest things we do every day is send our kids out into the world, right? And when we send our precious children to a school 7 hours a day and we rely on that school to educate them, that's an incredible demonstration of trust. And we need to validate that trust from families by running organizations that are going to live up to that promise and live up to what they need in their kids. Josh, this topic before head to Kimi?
No, I was going to say, why don't you tee up and introduce Kimi for everybody?
Yeah. Well, I am super excited that I got to have a brief but illuminating conversation with my friend Kimi Keene, a fellow Oaklander, has run, was here in the district as a kid, actually ran schools in and around Oakland for many, many years. including not only running a school, but managing all the elementary schools for Oakland Unified, managing all the Aspire public schools here in Northern California, and then moving on to her role funding Families in Action, which is a community partnership family engagement organization that's really built around parent power and how do we ensure that parents have a seat at the table. And not only is that good for parents, it's actually good for all of us to have families engaged, involved. So excited to share a little bit with folks her impressions and her thoughts. And yeah, look forward to hearing feedback from people on the episode by email, by LinkedIn message, by whatever way they want to communicate with us afterwards.
Awesome. Well, everybody, stay tuned and we'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Josh. Hi there. Excited today as part of our Higher Ground podcast to talk with my friend and longtime co-conspirator, Kimi Keene. Kimi, I'll let you introduce yourself to folks here on the mic. I know today we're really excited to talk about leadership today, what's needed, how community and others can support leaders, and how we can ensure that we're using equity to guide our decisions around who is leading our organizations. So I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll go into the conversation.
Yay. Thanks, Christina. So happy to be here. My name is Kimi Keene. I am currently the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Families in Action for Quality Education. We do family empowerment work here in Oakland. We've trained about 1,200 parents to advocate for their kids' education, whether that be at school or citywide, and seen some really great impact and wins. And before that, I spent 20 years in schools, running schools and systems, both district and charter. So I think this is year 27 for me.
You've been a leader for a really long time in school systems and in and around education. What is different about leadership today that people may or may not understand?
Yeah, absolutely. What I've really been thinking about lately is there is such a scarcity mindset that is prevailing. And I think we have everything we need to actually educate all kids well. We have to embrace a different mindset of abundance and possibility and real determination that every kid, regardless of zip code, regardless of language spoken at home, regardless of race and ethnicity, is going to be able to get a quality education in our country. And we can kind of stop pretending we don't have the resources to do that because we actually do. So I've just really seen that the dynamics and politics of us versus them, kind of having false arguments and spending a lot of our time on distractions rather than the real work of what does it look like to really innovate and really deliver incredible outcomes for students across our city.
And what do you think, what would you look for, or what do you think is most important in the qualities or experiences of those leaders who can make that happen for kids? Like if we're trying to think about finding or building more of those people, what are we looking for?
I think I get really excited to see and work with leaders who have a really clear sense of purpose and values, why they're in their work, and they're kind of wholehearted, whole spirit, dedicated to students and families, and particularly saying, how do we challenge and create a sense of belonging and strong outcomes for kids at all, who are coming to us from all different places. So I feel like leaders who embrace that vision, they really stand out, right? Where they're just the level of kind of commitment, enthusiasm for educating all kids is really there. I think it's in Oakland particularly, it's been really wonderful to see local leaders, people who've attended schools in Oakland, really leading schools and systems in Oakland. Always just gets me really excited about.
And what do you think those of us who are community members, board members, leaders in the space, what can we do to support those folks? What can we give them to really make it so that they're able to realize the possibility for all kids?
Let's say access to quality public education is actually really under attack right now. And I was just on a call today really talking about how we actually have to lead with a different level of intentionality and courage. The days of being able to kind of sit it out and kind of be neutral and stay over here, this is really a time when we need people to really step forward. And I say that's our boards. Those are our, systems leaders. Those are our school leaders. Those are educators. Those are families. We really need to hear the voices, and we really need to build collective power around our determination that all of our kids are going to get a great education. If we don't use our voice now, I do think we're going to kind of keep careening down this path where we're really having the wrong conversations. But I'm excited because I think when people are experiencing some loss and experiencing some surprises, And I think that when that happens, we've got to capitalize on those moments to say, how are we as leaders a part of this problem? And how do we need to change our actions if we want a different set of outcomes? Because really, our system, our ecosystem is designed for the outcomes it's getting right now. And if we want different outcomes, if we want access, if we want to focus on students and equity, we've actually got to be part of the solution in ways that we haven't been in any role, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And I think that there's a lack of vision that you're pointing to, right? Where folks are just kind of settling and accepting what is versus saying, no, we need to have a vision of a better future for our kids. And we need to drive there and find people that are excited about that. And I know for a lot of us, part of that vision is also just ensuring equity for all kids, right? You and I both live in Oakland. You're someone who grew up here in the school system, right? And I think we see the inequities inherent in many of our systems here and elsewhere. How do we ensure that equity is not just a value, but a lived practice in our school organizations and our leadership pipelines and how we're supporting those that are supporting kids?
Yeah. I'll tell you a little story of, I think, one of the most inspirational things that I've seen happen in Oakland in the last few years. There was a public charter school, Cox Academy, that had a $28 million facilities grant, and they were terrible. We're not talking about like adding sunroofs. We're talking about like leaking roofs. We're talking about flooded boiler rooms. We're talking about unsafe playground equipment. So they got this public grant to actually fix the facility, and they couldn't get the board to vote on it. The board was just avoiding it. The board wouldn't touch it. Those parents got so organized, with the support of their principal, with the support of their superintendent. They got so organized. They attended every board meeting for about 6 weeks, and they got a unanimous yes, finally, to release those grant funds. So the kind of leadership, it was like, there was the determination of like, actually, this is just not right. Like, we can't have our kids in Deep East Oakland in facilities that are not safe. And 2, we can't pass up public money to repair and, deal with our facilities. And then 3, just the leadership that embraced the need to organize, the need to mobilize community, the need to show up until we actually were more powerful than the people in power. And so to me, that's the kind of leadership that's required in hard times. But once you win a fight like that, what you learn is we can win, right? We can win really hard fights. And we've got to, I think, organize in those ways in the times that we're in right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. What do you think is misunderstood about the power of community or the way that community and families can engage and make a difference? I know you're spending so much time on that, but often folks feel like, yeah, it's a nice to have, but not a need to have. What's misunderstood about that power and influence?
I think there's a lot of unpacked privilege when we think we don't actually need to engage with the families that we serve in schools as leaders and as experts. And so I think there was an era where, I was at Aspire Public Schools, and I think there was an era where we're like, we're going to take those kids and we're going to give them a great education and put them on a different path in life. And we're going to kind of leave the families out of that equation. I think those times are gone. And I think the new times are saying, we can't leave power on the table. If we have 300 kids in a school, that means we have 600 parents. And what would happen if we actually worked with those parents as partners in their kids' education and did multi-generational engagement and learning? I certainly felt the power of that when I was a principal in the district. And I think it behooves at a time when talent is so strained in public schools. We are leaving out people who could be helping to accelerate school goals around literacy and math. When we actually take the time to work with and invite parents in and build their capacity and knowledge to be in those conversations, we see incredible outcomes from that. And we just, we're pretty overwhelmed with the number of schools and systems that want to do this work. But I think it's because we really need to look at power in new ways and realize that family power, even when parents didn't graduate from college or even high school, when they speak other languages than English at home, actually all of those parents have the power and potential to help their kids succeed and help the school succeed. So I think there's just like a total reframe, around what's possible. And I think that we've got to write families into the equation. And for so long, I think we're like, no, we'll just put our heads down and work harder. And in fact, that's a pretty inequitable proposition, especially when maybe people who are teaching or leading schools are not from the community. We've got to actually show the community that they can be represented in the highest levels of leadership and engagement in our school communities.
I love that. So next to last question, what's something you learned as a practitioner, as a teacher, a leader, a district leader building leader that you still take forward into your work today?
Good question. I think the power of listening, and involving people in decisions and priority setting. It's something we really pride ourselves on. We have parents and students are on our board. And I think when we develop priorities and understandings of problems with our community, that time that we take to do that is so valuable because we end up creating solutions that are actually so much more applicable and transformative than when we make decisions in isolation. I have doing one-to-one conversations is probably one of the biggest joys of my work, being able to sit down with parents and really understand how they're thinking about their kids' early literacy or how they're thinking about getting involved as a civic leader or getting involved in building awareness around elections, sitting down with school leaders one-to-one and really understanding their perspectives, which are dramatically different, right, than where families are coming from. Being able to take that and use those diverse perspectives to really build a really powerful strategy, I think is something that I can remember doing, as a teacher and then as a principal. And it's a strategy I think that never stops giving.
It's awesome. What's one thing that people should know about FIA, your organization, that they may not know?
I think we were born in Oakland and we did Oakland work. We're now in 5 cities and coaching districts and partner organizations. I think there's just a big appetite to kind of grow the role and influence of families, both at home, at school, and citywide. So I think we're excited about helping other communities discover, the power of their families.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Kimi, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yay. Thanks, Christina. Great to see you.
You too.